Welcome back to our news bulletin. Over 1,200 more people have died from COVID-19 in the US as the country's death toll nears 89,000. Meanwhile, Brazil has recorded 816 deaths overnight, becoming the world's fourth largest virus-hit country with 233,000 infections. The global COVID-19 death count has crossed 311,000 with over 4.6 million infections. More in this report.
With some exceptions, the number of coronavirus deaths has somewhat plateaued in most countries, while falling significantly in others. New York Governor Andrew Cuomo says he is considering reopening racetracks and a host of other activities, including baseball, in a limited capacity.
You increase economic activity, we expect to see an increase in numbers. We don't want to see a spike. Well, will there be a spike? It depends on how people react, and it depends on their personal behavior. Are they wearing masks? Are they using hand sanitizer?
Spain's government says it will extend its state of emergency for the last time until late June. Italy says it is taking a calculated risk as it moves to further ease its coronavirus lockdown measures. Prime Minister Giuseppe Conte said the contagion curve can rise again, but the country cannot afford to wait for a vaccine. Meanwhile, dozens of anti-lockdown demonstrators gathered in London's Hyde Park to protest against the government's curbs to tackle the outbreak. In Germany, thousands of people came out on the streets to protest against government restrictions.
I just want to call for government to stop telling lies about alleged facts and for face masks to be abandoned immediately so that we can live again in a democracy. That's what I stand for.
Meanwhile, China and South Korea have consulted Japan about easing border controls on business travelers. But Tokyo says it is cautious about relaxing border controls at this point due to fears of another spike in infections.
The number of COVID-19 infections in Pakistan has crossed 40,000 after over 1,000 tested positive in the last 24 hours. The Health Ministry said 39 more patients have died across the country, taking the toll to 873. The ministry said over 11,000 patients have recovered, while 319 remain critical. It said so far more than 373,000 tests have been conducted, with over 14,000 since yesterday. Meanwhile, the government has announced to open Pak-Afghan border at Torkham and Chaman posts. All trucks will be allowed to cross round the clock for 6 days a week while ensuring standard operational procedures. Indian forces have martyred 2 more civilians in Doda district of occupied Kashmir. The occupation troops targeted the youths during a cordon and search operation in Gundana area of the district. The Indian troops have martyred 5 Kashmiri civilians in May so far. Meanwhile, the Indian military forced women and children to spend night on road during an operation in Islamabad district. The locals said contingents of Indian Army arrived in armored vehicles and forced hundreds out of their houses. They said troops started door-to-door search operation in Mehman Mohalla and Dangapura, ordering locals to assemble around Lal Chowk. Afghanistan's National Security Council says the Taliban have killed 120 civilians in Ramadan. NSC spokesperson Javed Faisal said 350 others were wounded in attacks by the fighters over the past 3 weeks. He said there was a 33% increase in such attacks compared with the second week of the holy month. Faisal claimed at least 249 Taliban were killed and 138 wounded by the Afghan security forces in the past week. The Afghan Ministry of Defense said Afghan forces have returned to offensive mode after President Ashraf Ghani's order. The ministry said over the past few days, the forces have managed to conduct a series of powerful attacks on enemy positions. Meanwhile, the Taliban say the group is not instigating terrorism, but preventing it in Afghanistan. In a statement, the fighters said they have been targeted by US and Afghan media without reason or evidence. Discussing the recent terror attacks, the Taliban said they were earmarked despite having denied responsibility from the start. They said there were no greater horrors than the war crimes by US and hundreds of Afghan mercenaries trained by the Americans. The group said it is the only entity which stood against the atrocities of US military. Yemen's military says 2 of its soldiers and 6 Houthi rebels have been killed in clashes in southwestern Taiz province. In a social media post, a spokesman said 10 Houthis and 3 soldiers were also injured in government operations against the rebels. The military said clashes broke out between the two sides in the Han Mountain region of the province. Houthis have not commented on developments so far. Yemen has been beset by violence since 2014 when Houthi rebels overran much of the country, including the capital, Sana'a. The crisis escalated in 2015 when a Saudi-led military coalition launched an air campaign aimed at rolling back Houthi territorial gains. Libya's military says it has destroyed a Russian-made Panzer air defense system deployed by renegade General Khalifa Haftar. The spokesperson said the Panzer system was provided by the United Arab Emirates to the key Al-Watia Air Base. He said the military has launched an operation to overtake Al-Watia Air Base 140 kilometers southeast of Tripoli from Haftar's forces. Meanwhile, the death toll in a rocket attack by Haftar's forces on civilian settlements in Tripoli has risen to 7, including a 5-year-old boy. Health Ministry spokesperson Amin al-Hashimi said 17 others were injured. According to the UN, since the beginning of 2020, 7 health centers in Libya have been struck 12 times. International Union for Muslim Scholars has urged the Islamic world to stand against Israel's plans to annex occupied Palestinian territories. Secretary General of the IUMS, Ali Al-Qadraghi, accused Israel of exploiting the world's preoccupation with the coronavirus pandemic. In a statement, Qadraghi said Tel Aviv is proceeding with its aggressive policies with the U.S. president's support. He held the U.S. fully responsible for implications of approving Israeli plans of annexing Jerusalem and other Palestinian lands. He said IUMS calls upon all to stand with the Palestinians and their right in self-determination and to liberate their occupied territories. The annexation will take place on July 1st as agreed between Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his newfound ally Benny Gantz. Turkey says it has killed 3 militants of the Kurdistan Workers' Party in an operation in the southeast. Interior Ministry said terrorists were killed in an air-backed operation in Eruh district. In a statement, the ministry said the operation is still underway. He said the provincial Gendarmerie Command conducted the operation. The Interior Ministry said Turkey will continue to destroy weapon caches and shelters used by the terrorists. Indian-occupied Kashmir has recorded the highest jump in COVID-19 cases with 108 infections in the last 24 hours. The valley has registered 1,121 infections with 12 deaths so far. The Indian administration's data showed newly infected includes 12 pregnant women. Meanwhile, Delhi's curfew and communications blackout continues in the valley for the 286th day. The occupied territory has been facing extreme difficulty in tackling the pandemic due to unavailability of resources and the internet. The medics have told media they cannot get updates about the disease because of the communications ban. 134 migrant workers have died across India in the last 54 days due to COVID-19 shutdown in the country. Yesterday, 30 migrant workers died and dozens of others were injured in a road accident in northern state of Uttar Pradesh. The Indian media report showed majority of these deaths occurred in the third phase of the lockdown. It said at least 96 migrants died in 19 different incidents on the roads and railway tracks since May 6th. Meanwhile, another 15 migrants sustained injuries after their bus overturned in Jalpaiguri, West Bengal. Millions of laborers are still stuck at interstate borders facing food shortages and financial crisis. The Health Ministry has recorded over 2,800 deaths and nearly 91,000 coronavirus infections so far. An Indian community leader in New Zealand has lost his membership in the Association of Honorary Judicial Officers over Islamophobic posts on social media. An Indian diaspora newspaper in Auckland reported Kantilal Bababhai Patel called for the economic boycott of Muslims in India. Talking to media, the vice president of the association said, They received a complaint and it was investigated. Vice President N.CYPRUS Patel is no longer a member of the Wellington JP Association. She said the organization has referred the matter to the national body and asked them to consult with the Ministry of Justice. Earlier, several Indian nationals in United Arab Emirates and Canada were sacked from their jobs over anti-Muslim social media posts. We're taking a short break, but stay tuned for more news. Welcome back. As many countries have started easing COVID-19 lockdowns, Middle Eastern states continue to report new cases. Saudi Arabia reported a jump in its daily cases with nearly 3,000 new infections in the last 24 hours, raising the total to about 52,000. The Health Ministry of Qatar said the country's total infections topped 30,000 with over 1,500 new cases. Bahrain registered 72 new cases and 1 death, raising the tally to more than 6,600. The small Gulf country also launched a mobile application to alert individuals in case they approach an active coronavirus infected person. Kuwait confirmed 11 new virus-related deaths and over 900 cases in the past 24 hours. Oman recorded about 400 new cases, bringing the total to more than 5,000 with the death toll at 20. In the U.S., 11 firefighters have been injured in a huge fire and explosion in downtown Los Angeles. According to the local fire department, 3 firefighters suffered critical but not life-threatening injuries. A police spokesperson said the fire was knocked down in about 2 hours. Over 230 first responders were at the scene that turned into a major emergency after a big explosion. The cause of the explosion remains under investigation as it damaged one fire truck when fell debris on its roof. No civilian injuries have been reported so far. In Bosnia, thousands have demonstrated against a mass in Sarajevo for Croatia's Nazi allied soldiers and civilians killed by partisan forces at the end of World War II. The mass was a replacement for a controversial annual gathering which was cancelled this year due to the coronavirus pandemic. The decision to hold the mass in Sarajevo provoked a strong backlash in the country, where the memory of ethnic war in the 1990s is still fresh. It was condemned by Bosnia's Serbian Orthodox Church, the Jewish and Muslim communities, and several anti-fascist organizations. Protesters, many wearing masks, walked through the city singing anti-fascist songs. In Poland, Warsaw police used tear gas to subdue protesters, demanding a quicker end to stay-at-home orders in the country. Hundreds of protesters gathered in Old Town carrying anti-lockdown slogans. Demonstrators called for more economic support from the government and for the compensation of financial losses. Police blocked the planned march, saying in a statement published on Twitter that public gatherings are still banned under government restrictions. Officials said direct coercive measures and physical force were used in retaliation after police officers were attacked. Poland has over 18,000 confirmed coronavirus cases and more than 900 deaths. The Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus has slammed the EU declaration over the Eastern Mediterranean. The bloc urged Turkey to respect the marine jurisdiction of EU countries and their sovereignty in territorial waters. Northern Cyprus Prime Minister Ersin Tatar said the declaration is illegal and shows that the EU still adopts a pro-Greek Cyprus attitude. He said the bloc ignores the rights of Turkish Cypriot and Turkey in the Eastern Mediterranean. Tatar said Turkish Cyprus uses its international rights to explore hydrocarbon in the sea, which is contrary to claims by the EU and Greek Cyprus. France has one of the most wanted suspects in the Rwandan genocide. Felicien Kabuga has been arrested near Paris. He is accused of funding militias that massacred 800,000 people of minority Tutsi tribe in 1994. In a statement, the Justice Ministry said that Kabuga had a $5 million US bounty on his head and spent 26 years on the run. It said the 84-year-old accused was living under a false identity. The ministry said the arrest was the result of cooperation between French forces and the US, Rwanda, Belgium, and others. For many years, Kibuga was thought to be in Kenya, where politicians were accused of thwarting efforts to get him arrested. More than a quarter of a century after the genocide, he will go on trial at an international court. Turkish Coast Guards have rescued 26 asylum seekers off the Aegean coast in the northwestern city of Çanakkale. Turkish media said they were pushed back into the sea by Greek authorities as they attempted to enter Lesbos Island. The asylum seekers set off from Turkey's Aegean coast off Çanakkale province on a rubber boat. The group, including nationals from Afghanistan, Somalia, and Central Africa, were caught by the Greek Coast Guards. 2 children and 5 women were also among those rescued. Turkey has been one of the main routes for asylum seekers vying to reach Europe, especially after Syria's civil war started in 2011. Muslims around the world are observing the holy month of Ramadan. Restrictions due to COVID-19 pandemic have dampened traditional get-together over special iftar dinners, but there are still some places where people have found ways to celebrate. Look in this report.
Although governments have allowed religious congregation to some extent, they can't be enjoyed in traditional ways. In the mosques, Muslims have been instructed to follow guidelines for the prayers. To feel the spirit of Ramadan, few restaurants in Ramadan have been given permission to open at iftar times. Waiting for the food in the queue is a different type of experience for the people.
There's a lockdown going on in Bangladesh right now because of Corona, and all these shops are closed, all the food shops. Only one shop is open, so we are buying iftari. We have come here to buy iftari. And there's a very serious situation in Bangladesh right now, in Dhaka especially.
The restaurants have to adhere to strict rules. They have to maintain social distancing and provide sanitizers to customers. The workers also have to wear personal protection equipment.
We are on duty observing, and we see here that this restaurant is selling iftari items and abiding by the laws. They put out hand washing soap and sanitizer and also maintain social distancing for customers.
In Australia, all large participation iftar programs have been cancelled. However, at the entrance of Meadow Heights mosques, they are preparing iftar using meal packages brought by volunteers.
I like this service. I broke my fast with this service for the first time.
Muslims are halfway through the fasting month. Although governments are easing lockdown restrictions, they are not hopeful of celebrating Eid with a full zest after Ramadan.
Angola has been hard hit by climate change. After years of drought, the country has lost most of its water resources, devastating crops. More in this report.
Climate change has had a devastating impact on the people of Angola's CHILE province. Amid the collapse of the agricultural sector, men have migrated to towns and cities in search of work. This has led to the collapse of the local family system, hitting women and girls particularly hard. One local female farmer says the ongoing famine has torn her family apart.
He left because of hunger. There was a time when he used to buy food for the children. They used to share the work, but when the hunger got bad, he decided to go.
An NGO worker explains that when men abandon their families, young girls are forced to step in as surrogate parents.
Because of families being separated or abandoned, we find a lot of families with a single parent. So it is the girls that end up helping their mothers in one way or another. So they are likely to stop studying. They first need to provide for their basic needs.
For now, the situation shows no signs of improvement. On the rare occasion that it does rain, the downpour is so violent, crops suffer even more damage.
We had been waiting for rain for 6 months without rain, and before that we had winter. When the rains came, we were so thankful, we were relieved, but they came too hard and then we had no way of tending to our crops. We were not able to get to the fields.
women make up 80% of the people displaced by climate change. The UN warns 45 million people face a growing malnutrition in southern Africa.
In Chile, the indigenous YAGAN people have been distancing themselves from their culture. For decades, they have left their traditional pursuits of fishing and canoeing. A 71-year-old YAGAN Indian has devoted himself to keeping the fishing tradition alive. Let's find out about this here in this report.
The YAGAN tribe once lived off fishing, paddling their canoes along coastal waterways. Today, they depend on tourism, making handicrafts and working as seasonal laborers. The community has shrunk over the decades, and only a few hundred YAGAN people remain today.
So, the descendants of YAGAN people, who are very few due to the events we know about, including the colonization, epidemics, they have practically disappeared, and what is left? Only cultural goods.
Their language, which has no written form, is also at risk of vanishing.
In my opinion, it will disappear because at the moment there are children who want to learn the language, but then when they are teenagers, I think they will feel embarrassed.
In an effort to save YAGAN culture, one group of young people has devoted themselves to transmitting their languages to the new generation. Recently, the Chilean government returned several patrimonial pieces that were in a museum for 100 years back to the YAGAN.
We have a debt with original peoples. It is the case of the YAGAN people.
Representatives of the community hope that with their efforts, the future of the indigenous community will be preserved.
Now let's look at the weather from around the globe. This is all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at indus.news.